Well, welcome, everybody. Like I say, bear with us as we go into all of our shit here. I've got to always readjust. Eventually, I'll figure this out. Um, First of all, those of you who are here and who can hear us, can you hear the background music? It's like a little, what's it like? Taking attendance. It's like a little sound off. It might be a little low. That was too much.
That is, in fact, too much.
Okay. It's more to set ambience as usual. Because if I adjust the levels too much, then you're not going to be able to hear Archer, and then yada yada yada. So Archer,
I'm not important today.
You are though, because you're here for the shit show as well. But as long as we can hear Archer and we can hear me every once in a while, this is good. So I'm pleased with that. Anyways, welcome in everybody. I need to give Oracle their boop. And today this is our third little episode of Fallout Fellowship, where we discuss Lord of the Rings and all that encompasses. What do we decide? It's a Lord of the Rings for people who don't know Lord of the Rings, a beginner's crash course.
And who don't necessarily want to watch the movies, but want to be able to argue about it.
Exactly. So for anyone who doesn't know, who might be joining us or watching this in hindsight, my name is Snow, Melting of Snow. This is my primary channel for variety streaming, but we have been doing this little talk show recently this past month, and I think we're really enjoying it, so we're going to keep on going. Archer, if you would like to introduce yourself as always.
Hello, I'm Archer. I do not have a stream other than this little podcast here, and I'm happy to see everyone joining in.
Yeah. Let's see here. Oh, I put it up way too loud again. There, now I won't touch it. Just kidding, it's being difficult. Hold on. Now we should be good. Today we're going to be talking Tolkien's Elves, and by that I mean we're going to be touching on them because first of all, I did read more than a full paragraph as referenced in the Going Live. However, there's a lot. So please forgive me, since this is a crash course anyways, for people who just want to enjoy the media. This will be good for you, and people can stay off my ass.
I found out literally 5 minutes before stream started that there was going to be a part 2 to this, so enjoy, y'all.
Listen, I think I was telling Apple about this before. I couldn't find the exact quote again, but in my studying 2 hours before the stream, I found out that Tolkien did not actually create this world and then put elves into it. He created the world after he created the Elvish languages.
I'm sorry, I am 0% surprised about that, because as we all know, Tolkien cared about the elves and could not be fucking bothered about everybody else.
Agreed. It makes a lot of sense, and it would also explain why. The first little tidbit I'd like to share with you, I did not put it in the PowerPoint, but the little tidbit I'd like to share with you is that they were originally called, one of the first things they were called was the Quenya, which actually means the speaking ones. They were the first race on Middle Earth, or Earth, to develop language, or to have a speaking language that they could understand, which is your first indication of exactly how arrogant this group of people is. There were less than 200 of them originally, just about. I won't go into the extremes about it. There were 3 separate groups. There was like 14 in the first tier, 56 in the second, and then like 72 in the third. So that's about 200. I don't want to do the math right now. Apologize. Just a little under. but they called themselves the Speaking Ones because they came onto to Middle Earth and discovered other species, yes, but they were the first ones that had language, which they quite often, in what I was researching, Year of the Tree, which implies they found the Ents, they found trees, they found all this other shit, and we know that the Ents have language. So that's your first arrogance from the Elves, I think. I think that is the first recorded of that.
So what I'm hearing is elves are colonizers. They represent the British Empire.
I don't think you're wrong. What I also discovered, and again, like these are things that we could probably go over in a different thing if we want to get more detailed. But really briefly, because we've noticed so much of Tolkien's world is heavily influenced by the Christian faith, which, whatever, like, there's a lot of media influenced. The elves are essentially Moses. Like, I, without getting too far into detail, they brought forth all of their bullshit and acted like that was it. They were the ones who moved across, and they brought everybody into the promised land, and like, just real interesting reading about it. Like, there's actually a really good, I should have referenced it, but I believe their name is Nerd of the Rings. I found a YouTube video. The way that they were describing it sounded very Moses going across the Red Sea. So that's a whole other conversation.
I want you to know that I'm very much experiencing the meme of the white woman with the math over her face, because I'm just realizing exactly how much the elves really are just a representation of like a colonizing power and all the ways in which they are that. Because like, if you think about it, like, they came to Middle Earth and began the process of colonizing it, to the extent of like not acknowledging that other native species had their own forms of communication, their other forms of language, but also to the extent that they did not allow anybody to come back to their homeland.
That is accurate. Which, again, like, I wish I had 2 weeks, but I didn't have 2 weeks. Like, I don't know, I've been in this rut, and that's why I think that it's worth having a second episode where we really delve into it. There's just so much. It is so dense. But getting into it, what we actually want to kind of go through, because this entire episode is essentially going to be its own Smasher Pass.
As it should be.
Am I wrong? Yes, it should be. So moving over here. What's your favorite Tolkien race, and why is it elves? Well, thank you for asking. They were a divided people. Just as I said, literally, holy fuck, there is so much to unpack. But here's all we really care about in regards to the movie media coverage. And I didn't get extremely into the Rings of Power, mostly because we haven't gotten through past the third episode still. And like most of what we're finding in Rings of Power, it informs Lord of the Rings, but it's not necessary to people who maybe haven't gotten to enjoy this media, or, you know, are just like, it's not that big of a deal. What did you throw at me? Oh, a mint. Thank you. So
You're welcome.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Archer, if that's, because like really all we really truly care about in our years of service to this particular group of movies and things is Rivendell, Lothlorien, and Mirkwood. Am I wrong?
Yeah, and I would argue barely Mirkwood. It comes more into play during the Hobbit movies that I slept through. But generally, the only one that you typically care about is Legolas. And I think a lot of people, because like, I don't think I realized that Legolas was an elf from somewhere else initially.
What do you mean?
Like, I was like, oh, they're in Rivendell, where the elves are. There's just this other elf that isn't Elrond representing the elves, too.
Fair enough. I see what you're saying. Yeah, they don't really go into it, especially. But yeah, so for anyone who's even a little bit remotely, I think most commonly people know the Rivendell Elves. that is the seat of the House of Elrond. They are described in most of what I've seen, and visually from what we've seen from movies and media. They are more left-brained. They are scholarly. They are the ones who have a focus on museums and holding on to library like information and things like that. I think they are kind of, even just seeing them as we do without knowing too much about them, you can tell that they have a regard for history, because not only have they lived it, but they seem like the keepers of it in a lot of ways. And you see that a lot in Elrond himself. He has lived the history that has led up to this point in The Lord of the Rings. And then, of course, you've got Lothlorien. This is the seat of Galadriel and Celeborn, his husband and wife, or wife and husband, we should say. They are more described as being more right-brained or artistic. They have a love for art and beauty, and without it being, it may be a little egotistical, but without it being narcissistic, which I think could probably be something that we explored. But like, I've never gotten the elves, while arrogant, do not seem like narcissists. They still have a hand in the goings on of this world, for the most part.
Yeah, I think we get really good representations of that fact. And just to pitch in a little bit, I think Rivendell, because you mentioned scholarly, but I think also it's important to recognize political. They definitely read as the kind of United Nations of the elves that really deal with the other races more heavily than anybody else. Like, everyone else is pretty insular, and Rivendell is the one that, like, they're like, okay, those guys are gonna take care of the people talking today. That's fine.
Exactly. Like, that seems to be what we get. Now, some honorable mentions, especially since Chad Apple over here bringing up the Celebrimborn, who made the rings for the elves and for Sauron. He was in, and we've seen it in Rings of Power. I don't remember the name of the city. I forget, but it's none of these. It was an entirely city of its own. It's where the elves had their blacksmiths and their artisans and things like that. It was a whole other city that we really don't see terribly much of. Not to mention, again, without getting too involved or too deep into it, because of how many inaccuracies Rings of Power has, I imagine that city exists. I just don't know as much about it, I'll be honest. I see Archer researching a little bit, but Celebrimborn is in a whole different city.
Eldamar, maybe?
Yes, that sounds about right. Which, really what we're focused on here is, at the time of Lord of the Rings itself, the trilogy, the only two that are really important or have any kind of power, and they're even on their way out, are Rivendell and Lothlorien. And then that's when we also get into the only reason Mirkwood is relevant at all by the time Lord of the Rings occurs is because Legolas is from Mirkwood. While Thranduil, his father, and Legolas are both Sindar elves, which are going all the way back into it, like, they are, I believe, technically the descendants of the first elves, like the first tier of elves. I forget what the names are. It's like, they changed them, but Noldor is one of them, and Vanyar and all this other shit, and they even renamed themselves. Hell, like Galadriel, her name's not Galadriel. She has two other names. But long story short, Mirkwood is primarily low elves, and lovingly labeled, not only by us, but many fans, as the awkward provincials. I wasn't comfortable putting the word that we normally use on there.
They're the rednecks of elves.
Yeah.
Hillbilly elves.
Hillbilly elves is a much kinder word of saying it. There's another H word that I don't know if I should say. But yeah, they are, while they live in a very pretty area, they're not as important to what we tend to focus on, because you're right, they're more primarily, we really only see Mirkwood in The Hobbit.
And the Hobbit at least portrays it as much more like insular in the fashion of, oh, not only do we not involve ourselves with people, like we actively don't want to, whereas Galadriel and her boo seem to be more of a, oh, we don't try to hang out with people, but like we'll hang with you if you come here, I guess.
Exactly. Like, I don't know, I think that's part of the beauty of the elves too, or at least the interesting thing about the elves for me, is the fact that they don't get up in people's business. Like, you know, they like a good gossip, but they're not actively, by the time we see them in Lord of the Rings, they're not actively fucking people's shit. Whereas in, say, Rings of Power right now, we're seeing how they have a direct influence over Middle-earth and its development. They want the tea, but they want the tea to come to them, exactly. And I think part of that is not only, we've already been through all this, we're really reaching the end of our era, and we want to go home, but it's also like their leadership, so Elrond, Galadriel, Celeborn, they all kind of seem to have collectively come to this place of like, we've seen what we've influenced, we've seen the development of these cultures and these peoples, and they no longer, in our arrogance, they no longer need our guiding hand, but we also we're not as relevant.
Paternalism and colonialism, what up, imperialistic powers?
You see what I'm saying, though, is that we need like maybe 2 or 3 other episodes
Yeah,
of this.
I'm probably gonna end up having to do in this essay about how the elves are the British Empire, because like I've noticed some of the parallels before, but like you pointing in this out so beautifully in this wonderful PowerPoint of yours and in this conversation, like I'm really seeing those parallels and seeing how Jesus, like how Tolkien really took what he was experiencing as part of like the British Empire and as part of the war, and really showing how if the idea is that in the Lord of the Rings, it's the end of an age, it's the end of the age of elves, and it's the start of the age of man, then like what they're talking about is a shift in power away from like these imperialistic superpowers, right? And like the World War is what it was supposed to be, and the shift towards like people who live in these spaces and know themselves, ruling themselves in a real fashion, and maybe the best of elves being like, okay, well, we did all this shit, good or bad, we don't know. How do we leave them with their best foot forward? Which I think is what Lord of the Ring kind of leaves us with.
I would definitely agree with that. And I think that not only with that assessment, but also like, yeah, the sun kind of setting on the British Empire in not even like, what, 40, 50 years before we were born. Like, even into now, I feel like I really don't know what Tolkien was like, but I wonder if he didn't have, like, as optimistic as an optimistic person wrote this story, I feel like, with the way that Sam is and the way that the world continues to move, the way that he's written this, like, somewhere in me, I believe that Tolkien really would have wanted to see this as a way for making ends meet, making sense of the world in a way that leaves it positively more than negatively. And if we're thinking of it that way, and it's, yes, the end of the Elvish Empire in this case, like, you're right. We're seeing these people who are like, I'm gonna, again, steer them in a good direction, and then my hands are off of it. Like, it's ultimately back to you, which is where it should have been anyways. Because I think that, again, these particular leaders see that the destruction that was wrought, like, if they were already experiencing their own issues, they have this arrogance to say that, oh, we made it better, when really they just adjusted things. So,
I mean, arguably Sauron and his homie, his boo, all of them were elves, right? So like they were dealing with the issues that they had brought upon Middle Earth anyway, and then maybe realized that they weren't in the best position to do so, because like we talked 2 weeks ago now about the hobbits and how the hobbits played such a big role in actually closing out the storyline of evil that existed in Middle Earth in a real fashion, in a way that mankind and dwarvenkind and elvenkind had failed to. And like in all of that, I think prior to that point, hobbits had been seen as like the less of them, the least of them, and being treated as children and infantilized. And then we realize, I think, or at least I think the elves realized, the leaders at this point realized that like their place should have never been in maybe fixing this, because it wasn't as much as it was like their responsibility to fix, because it was one of their own doing shit. It was their world in such a fleeting way.
And like that's what gets me about having gone through a bunch of this stuff and still not even getting that deep into it, is that you're right, it was one of their own doing this that was causing all this trouble, but it was the worst of them, the most conceited of them, the most like Morgoth wanted to be a god. He wanted to create life, and he was only able to destroy life in order to bring out a different kind of life. And like, I don't know, that's an interesting question, Apple, of like, in this metaphor, who would that make Sauron? I think it's the collective. They even say it in the books and the movie, like, he is all of the malice. The ring itself is all of Sauron's malice, and I think that is who Sauron is just the malice of the world, the evil of the world. Like,
he's Satan.
Yeah, he is.
I mean, they describe, I think both of them, but Sauron especially, as like in his kind of original form, being the Lightbringer, like being beautiful
and charming was his whole thing.
So he's Lucifer. Like literally, like there's that direct parallel, because he had another name prior to Sauron. Sauron is like Satan. It's his title more than his name. Or like Lucifer, yeah, sure, because Lucifer's angel name, right, was like Samael or something like that. So like we get all of these parallels to religion, and I think eventually we'll have to do an episode about Tolkien and his frenemy C.S. Lewis, because they had beef, but in a fun way. Well, you know, Tolkien did this whole like elves as angels bullshit fantasy novel, and like ported some of the religious stuff but not all of it, and like was really, I think, careful about it. And C.S. Lewis was just like, here's Jesus as a lion. Do you want some Jesus? Here's Jesus as a lion.
That feels a little on the nose of I never, without getting too off topic, I never got that into The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Like, I saw the movies and that was it.
I read all of the books because I was in like my fantasy loving stage, and they were very easy to read, and they're very good. And I do have big complaints. Like, if you actually read these books, it could be their own podcast, honestly, because I have a lot to say about how they did Susan dirty. But like they're really good books, and they're very interesting to compare to Lord of the Rings, because they are both kind of that fantastical nature, but like also C.S. Lewis was like, I'm gonna have a lamp, like an electric lamp, in my fantasy world, and Tolkien is like, how the you can't justify that. And then like the way he justifies it is hilarious, because it works. I think it's Lord of the Rings is, to give you a perspective on it, Snow, that you'll understand. Lord of the Rings is very much like Critical Role, and the line, you know exactly where I'm going. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the Adventure Zone.
I find this to be an acceptable likening, which means that I would probably enjoy and also have a lot of critical things to say towards really both of them. But interesting. Okay. Huh.
And I will add one last thing about C.S. Lewis. I believe he was a convert to Christianity, or to Catholicism in particular. So the way that he approaches religion and in his metaphor in his books is one that I think would be a lot more critical and eye-opening than somebody who was born into the religion. So I want to give him credit where credit is due. Like, he is, like, a lot of theologians, like when I was in my courses for social justice that were through the Institute of Pastoral Studies, like, there was a lot of like, oh, you should read these books by C.S. Lewis, and not just like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Those are like his fantasy novels, but like his theology. So like, I do find his books to be like heavily religious, but there's a lot of good religious in those. I think it's like the best of Catholicism in some senses, as well as some of the bad. Like I said, I have beef about Susan. C.S. Lewis, at me.
Interesting. Then yeah, that may be something we visit in the future if I can get my... I'm sure we have a copy somewhere lying around.
I have all 7 books in a box set that my sister bought me from the Scholastic Book Fair. We good. We good, boo.
All right, yeah, hit me up. I gotta get through my Demon Slayer manga before I do that. I'm finally reading those again. Yeah, we'll have a little book club. Okay. I'm going to move to the next slide. Do you like my little asterisk, by the way? I was going to put something there, and then I did not.
I saw the asterisk, and I saw the nice way you put rednecks, and I was like, I'm going to bring it up if he doesn't. I'm going to do it!
I mean, Awkward Provincials really does nail it on the head, though, for what we've seen of them. Like, it's not like they're idiots or anything. They're just... They seem to have their own way of life that doesn't involve themselves. Just like you said, like... They don't involve themselves even with their own kin. And I start to wonder, the more that I've read of all of this, like, I start to wonder how much the elves see each other as kin versus, like, people who happen to have come from the same continent. Which, again, is a whole other thing that we could probably delve real deep into. But there are, I think I saw there was upwards of 7 to 9 different elvish, like, not tiers, what am I, like, subsections, and it was really interesting. So I really want to delve into it, but it's so much, literally so much to unpack.
That's because it's the only thing he could be bothered with, number 1. And number 2, it really just reads as, like, the British Empire in the way that, like, we would like, look at this, like, people outside of the British Empire would look at the British Empire and be like, this is all the British Empire. And people inside of the British Empire would be like, well, I'm from London and I'm not from this place. And I think Mirkwood, I think the way it reads to me is very much as like the Appalachian people, in that sense of like, we are very insular, we're very to ourselves. And like, this is our culture in a very distinct way from everyone else. And like hold themselves apart. Yeah, Mirkwood could be Australia.
I think that's an excellent likening, because I don't think, well, it's not, like, I think of Quigley Down Under when I think of Australia, like that kind of sense of it. I don't think it's exactly where they're sending specifically like a bunch of their criminals or anything, but it is like kind of the rejects in a way. We're also buffering a little bit, so give it just a moment. We're going to see if it gets back up. Because my kbps also dropped real bad.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Not a big deal. If I need to restart, I certainly can, but... Did it catch up? Okay. Anyone who happens to be... borking along with us, if you want to refresh your page, my kbps are real low, but they're slowly climbing back up, and the VOD will still be up. So all right, moving along, we are going to start with Rivendell, because again, it is probably the most commonly aware type of situation. Not to mention, it's where some of my favorite elves come from. And of course, we start with Lord Elrond, my grandfather. Am I wrong? Hold on. I gotta adjust in my seat. Oh boy, we dropping. We doing the dropping. Alright, so I did provide I'm a very visual person, so for anyone who was with us last time, there are going to be just as many pictures, if not more. On the lower left, we see Elrond as he was cast for Rings of Power. He's a bit younger, obviously. And then, of course, our Hugo Weaving, the OG Lord Elrond. Aged like fine wine, if I do say so myself, if we're going to accept this as any remote amount of canon. I mean, what can we say about Lord Elrond other than, oh man, it's doing the buffering.
He's a try-hard.
In what way is he a try-hard?
He has, like, at least the way that they're picturing him in Rings of Power, in like the 2 episodes we've seen, because fun fact, we are terrible at watching TV shows. In the way that they're picturing him, like, he gets a lot of grief for being not truly an elf, which I find hysterical. And so, like, I think he is trying to earn his way. And, like, specifically, there's that one scene where they're like, oh, there was a meeting. And he's like, why wasn't I invited to this meeting? And they're like, oh, it was only for, like, the highborn elves or some shit like that. And he's just, like, upset about it. But, like, in Rings of Power, you can really see, like, where a political mind like him could have advanced to the point where, like, he is the seat of Rivendell versus just, like, a city manager, which I think is what his official position in Rings of Power is.
You are correct. I forgot about that.
So I think he's very politically astute, if we want to talk about it. And he's also very permissive, I want to say. Like, Grandpa lets you get away with everything now. And we see that a little bit in the way, like, specifically there's 2 or 3 scenes I can speak of, and I know that you can speak of them too. I'll let you talk about the Hobbits, but in the Hobbit movies specifically, he's like, oh, you guys can't do that, and then lets them fucking sneak out of Rivendell anyway.
100%. Well, and, like, now you're bringing it up, because, like, I could go on all day about Lord Elrond. Not only is he just an amazing character, but to see him go from where he's at in Rings of Power, where he did the same thing. He kind of gave a little bit of extra lenience to Galadriel. Although, additional kind of asterisks to this is that I will reference again the fact that Galadriel's entire storyline was created specifically for this show, which I still think they did a really good job the way that they decided to do that to get everything to move along. But, like, he is more, like, permissive for and more understanding of Galadriel's plight. I think we also did see more of the fact that he got screwed over too, because of exactly what you said, the fact that he wasn't brought into certain things or fully into the know, or even made to believe that this is the best choice, and this is actually not only the best choice, but is also an honor to have Galadriel be able to go home back to where we all came from. And really, she's pissed, like, and once he sees how pissed off she is, like, there's a little bit of a, like, I don't know, you can kind of tell that he regrets that he agreed to that and that he encouraged that sort of decision for her. But I think if they do ultimately get back together, if he sees her later on, which they may already have in the show, we haven't gotten there, but I think that he's hi, Finn. I think that he's going to... This will be one of those moments where we see him for the person he is. He'll make an apology of some kind and, like, move on from there. Like, I don't know. But he does have a little more allowance. He lacks the arrogance that... I'll say arrogance a lot, because that's what the elves are in my mind. But he lacks the arrogance that most of the others do, and I think it does come from exactly what you were saying. The fact that while he has power, it is almost like being the... What's the word I'm looking for? It's like phantom power. It's like he can
Puppet
make
master?
decisions. Yeah, he can make decisions, but and people respect his opinions, but he is not the final say the way that he is later on in life. And I think that I'd really be interested to see how he went from city planner to this later on, because was he cunning and did he make shitty decisions and throw people under the bus, or did he genuinely get there on his merit?
I think... Well, first off, I need to say before I forget, you can, like, you keep saying arrogance, just call them what they are, wasps. Like, just call them what they are, they're wasps, right? They're wasps. They're just wasps. I'm just gonna keep saying wasps for another minute because I'm vibing with this feeling. But in terms of Elrond, like, what we have seen is, apart from his, like, merit as, like, a really good city planner and able to see outside of the box and work with the dwarves, or, like, want to work with the dwarves where the other elves would not see that as a possibility, in Rings of Power, we also see him being kind of groomed by the king, Gilgamesh, or whatever his name is. I forget his name. I don't know what his name is. It's Gilgas something. Gilgamesh. There was my brother and me bit about this not being able to pronounce names, and I'm just gonna go with Gilgamesh, which is not right. But he's being groomed by this king, and in part it's because of his acute mind. It's about his problem solving. It's about his ability to solve things outside of the box. But I think also in part it has to do with his ability to see into the future, right?
I always forget about that, because it's like those are the moments where he kind of comes through with a little bit of that manipulation, a little bit of that, like, how much of it is him and how much of it is his inherent ability, because he just, like, I don't know that he would abuse that power. I think he would abuse it, or he wouldn't abuse it at large. He would abuse it to get things that are really important to him on his personal level, and to help his people avoid certain, like, destruction, like, in big ways, things that are, I don't know, things that are ultimately forgivable, but also, like, that's a shitty thing to do, how dare you.
Agreed. I also think he also suffered from some of that preconceived prejudice against mankind, in that, like, yeah, he took in Aragon and his mother and all of that, but, like, he witnessed Isildur failing, like, the world, right? Not just mankind, but the world, and not destroying the ring. So I think he was embittered against mankind as a race and could only see the worst of them for a long time. And it was through his daughter's love of, like, this dirty, dirty man that he was like, okay, maybe mankind is redeeming, if only because my daughter finds something redeeming in this dirty, dirty man.
This dirty, dirty man. It's funny you say that, because there's something later on that I was going to refer to him as being this dirty boy, but you've already covered it, so I won't bother.
No, please do. It bears repeating. Like, Return of the King, where Aragorn is like the least attractive Aragorn, except he has the salt and pepper, and I simp.
That's fair. But yeah, I'm sorry. I would also like to apologize to our audience. I tend to ramble a little too much. Archer is much more put together than I am, but, like, elves.
Shut the fuck up. I love the rambling. Plus, the rambling is where I'm getting all of my ideas from. I'm like, Snow is doing the processing for me, and I can arrive at the conclusion that we'll probably both
There you
agree
go.
to.
Exactly. You know what I'm saying. You're translating exactly what's on my mind. But yeah, I think, like, bottom line, Elrond is at his core a good person. I think he's got more of a sense of humor than anyone, because that's the other thing I wanted to touch on with elves, is that they have a very reserved nature and a very stoic nature, and I think part of that is because they live so long that they're kind of aloof in their own way, but they have their fun where they can, and we don't see as much of that as frequently as we do with Elrond. He's done it, like, he has a little bit of a sense of humor when he's older, especially in, I'll go back to The Hobbit when he has the dwarves. In, like, when they first arrive, he has his soldiers circling them and, like, acting as though they're about to start a fight. He gets off his horse and he comes down and says something in Elvish, and Gandalf like has to translate for them. The dwarves have their stuff at the ready to go for a fight. He says it, Elrond says it so seriously, and Gandalf just looks at them and smiles, and he's just like, Lord Elrond is welcoming you to his realm and invites you to dine with him, is essentially what I believe what it was that they said. And like, it's little things like that where you still get that reservation, and he's not exactly pleased to see them, but he's not going to turn them away, and he's going to have fun at their expense, especially knowing now that he was friendly, at least in Rings of Power, with, what's his name? What's the fucking...
Durin.
Yes, with Durin. Like, that kind of thing. And I think that's a skill, the sense of humor is developed. I really think that the elves are oddly neurodivergent.
Hell yeah. And I think also to speak on his relationships and how they might have shifted, I think he does suffer a little bit from the elven side, the same thing that all of the elves do, which is like this longevity that keeps you disconnected. And we talked about it before, where the elves were like, oh, 20 years have passed, that's nothing, we're still friends. And then Durin was like, yeah, bitch. But I think also, he revels in those opportunities to partake in life with other races, more so than his peers do, because of his nature as an outsider within his own culture, in a certain sense. Because I think he genuinely enjoys having them and like being part of those councils and including them in those decisions more so than a lot of the other elves we see. Mirkwood in comparison specifically, but also again to the point of like he has a sense of humor. Like, there's no way he didn't know that the other three hobbits were just chilling in the bushes during the Council of the Ring, right? Like, he can see the future.
Oh, 100%.
Like he knew, and like he was like, it looks like y'all can't respect the rules and are chilling outside of your rooms and doing exactly what we told you not to do. Who told your guards not to patrol those hallways, sir?
No shit.
Who told your guards to just turn a blind eye against short little brats?
Well, and how much of that, I don't know if they go into any of that, how much of his like being able to kind of see some of the future, how much of it is, I know that they're going to need help, so I'm going to put certain things in place to kind of move that along a little bit. I'm not going to make this difficult for these hobbits, or I'm not going to make things difficult for, you know, the other races on this world to, like, yeah, pulling away most of the elves or pulling away his daughter is going to make things emotionally difficult for some of our main characters, but he's not actively working against these people. Like, how much of that did he see at this young age, you know, to know that the world was going to change in a way that the elves weren't as relevant, and how actively did he work to make things at least copacetic for them?
I think as somebody who is in a place of power, whether more like a governor than a king, or however we want to put it, I think he truly reached a point in his understanding of the other races as truly equals to the elves in all of their capacity to create culture and society and to exist in a way that I think others still continue to see them as children. And I think he struggled with that as well, right? With like validating them as their own individual personalities and not just like that paternalistic attitude. But I think he's absolutely one of those dads who's like, oh, you think this is a good idea, huh? Tell me more about why you think this is a good idea. And you're like ready to fight, and then at the end he just laughs at you and goes like, hey, that is a good idea.
You're right. How much, the way that you just described it, how much does he feel like a New Testament God? After he had his kids, he just like mellowed the fuck out.
Hell yeah. Absolutely.
Man, no, I mean, we have so many slides to get through, or so many characters to get through, and like we could go on forever about Elrond, because I just think he is genuinely, I don't know, he may be the most influential and important elf in overall in the story, but I think it's a lot to do with his decisions behind the scenes, and also having lived the history that's led them to this point. But I could be wrong.
I don't disagree with you there. I would say Sauron, maybe more.
He doesn't count.
He counts. But I agree with you there. I think he's so important to Lord of the Rings, and I think in a way it might even be Tolkien's self-insert.
Oh my god.
Am I wrong though? Like, doesn't it read that way?
If you put it that way, then yes, I think that could be a very good way of describing him. Yeah.
Because he reads very much of like the author of this story, like Doctor Strange, right? Like I made this comparison before. Like if he can really see the future and he saw all of these futures.
No, hold on.
Okay, no, you can finish. Hold on. Remind me to get back around to this about Yoda, but go on.
I'm sorry.
I lost my train of thought. It's
I'm
your
sorry.
turn. Just screaming at me like I deserve it. God. Listen, Linda, listen. Anyway, if he really can see all of these variations of the future, a la Doctor Strange, with the one in a bajillion chances of it succeeding, then like he is the author of the story, and he recognizes that his involvement is only to the extent of easing the passage of this journey and this pain for these people and becoming a place where they can return to rest and heal, rather than being an actor in his own right. Like he knows that his time as that has passed, maybe, and then recognizes again when it's time to reforge the blade and to respect his daughter's decisions, that maybe he is more of an actor in this story than he admits to being, and that inaction on his part is just as damaging now as it has ever been, which is when I think you see a lot more movement on the part of the elves to involve themselves in the war and in the battles, and, you know, to move to the gate with the alliance of dwarves and man and 3 hobbits, four hobbits, 2 hobbits with them. I think in those moments you really truly see that he had stepped so far back in a certain respect at the beginning of Fellowship that he was, you know, preparing to leave and like was trying to do like this one last thing, and then was like, oh no, like we're still fully entrenched here and it's going to require more to get out of it than I thought. So like here's some more action on my behalf that will pad the odds.
Yes. Okay. No, and like involving that, come with me on this journey very briefly. And by briefly, I mean come on with this journey that's going to go on for a hot minute. So I fucking loathe, and you know this, I loathe Dumbledore and Yoda. Dumbledore from Harry Potter, Yoda from fucking Star Wars. The way
That's Dumbledore.
Yeah, fuck both of those characters. They're my most hated goddamn fictional characters, and probably two of my most hated things in the entire fucking existence of life. Because they refuse, they damage regardless of what they do. The stories ultimately are set up in a way that these guys knew what was going on, and they refused to do anything about it, or they chose actions that were damaging in one way or another, like, and kept that information from other people. Like Dumbledore not only knowing that Harry was a fucking Horcrux and that ultimately he was probably going to die. I'm never
Spoilers!
Listen, it's been years. Listen, okay. I'm sorry, but it just, I fucking hate Dumbledore, and part of that may just be because I'm such a simp for goddamn Alan Rickman and his portrayal of Snape. It might be just because he's a piece of shit. I don't know. But if you're saying...
I still hate Snape, too.
I know, and that's valid. Alan Rickman all the way, all day, every day. He
did an amazing job, but I still hate him.
But if you're painting it in that light, if Tolkien, in a sense, is Elrond, if you're saying that this is the person... Like, if we're talking in a very large, like, big brain kind of way, this is someone who's helping to write this narrative. Dumbledore is someone helping to write this narrative. Yoda is someone helping to write this narrative. This is the only person who's been helping to write this narrative who does it correctly, or who does it well, and realizes their mistakes and goes back and edits and, like, makes those mistakes clean, or, like, you know, admits them and moves on and corrects their actions. They have development. I don't know.
He's the only one that does it without any true malice,
Yes.
or without any true
real ulterior motive.
Yeah, without any real beef in the game, in a certain sense, because, like, Dumbledore, I felt responsible for Tom and, like, saw too much of himself and of Grindelwald and Tom and all of that, and, like, really became this architect of pain. When you truly step back and look at this full story and look at all of his actions, like, he truly believed this was the only way to win, but because he didn't give anybody else a chance to make other decisions for themselves. And I think the same is true for Yoda. And Elrond was like, letting you make all of these decisions for yourself. I'm letting you make all of these choices for yourself. And then realizing, I need to make a choice as well. I'm still part of the story.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, the reason that was such a big, moment for me, really, is because that's part of the reason that I wanted to hate Gandalf initially. Like, he gave me those ick vibes that Dumbledore and Yoda used to give me, but only because I was like, this is someone who they present as, like, being omnipotent or as having these abilities that are beyond our reckoning, and yet I can't hate him because even though, like, it was a little bit of a betrayal of my young mind for him to come back to be... to still be the same person, but not, like, it felt wrong, but he's painted in such a way that he should know these things. He's putting these people in danger, but he's really not. He's willing to sacrifice himself in the way that these other characters that I fucking hate don't seem to be willing to do. They want to sit on their knowledge, they want to sit on their abilities and not use them in a productive way.
Thank you for understanding exactly the way I felt when he came back as Gandalf the White. Like, the amount of betrayal and, like, sorrow I felt, because I was like, this isn't the same person. And I think I could not see him as Gandalf again until that moment in Gondor, where he goes apeshit.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, that moment where he's sitting with
Pippin.
With Pippin. And
death,
yeah, and, like, you're like, oh, it's not that he's not the same person. It's that he's had to grow so much, so painfully. And, like, he's so enraged by the suffering that his family still had to go through to get to this point. And the decisions that they're making, because it puts him in more danger, and not because he doesn't necessarily think they're the right decisions. He's angry that they have to make them to start with.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of like the Avatar thing, too, in a way. Like, he came back as exactly what they needed. He left them as a peacetime Gandalf, and he came back as wartime Gandalf.
And I don't think he ever wanted to be that.
I don't think so either. But I think that him coming back and still showing that quote-unquote humanity, like, showing us he was still in there while having become sort of a new person was vital. Like, it may not have read to the characters, but it comes across to the audience in such a way that it's like, this feels like a betrayal of this character. This feels like a cop-out for not just, letting us continue to have this character, but really it's just, he came back as what they needed. And
decisive.
Yeah.
Like, and it's not to say that Gandalf wasn't decisive before, but I think you can really see the way that his indecision affected them in the first movie, in their travels, where they like try all of these ways to get to Mordor because he wants to avoid the Mines of Moria and all that they entail, because he's trying to save them this pain. And then you get Gandalf the White, who is this character that is very decisive, that knows what steps to take, and you're like, well, has he always been this? Because then that's a betrayal of who he was. And if he hasn't always been this, then like, who is this person now? And I think that is his biggest character change, but it reads so badly in the moment, because you're just like, who, like, this implies that like he could have always been this and he chose not to be, which means he was lying about who he was before, or it implies he's not the same person at all, and that he's making these decisions without the same sort of gravitas as he was giving them before, when in reality it's like he knows exactly the weight every decision has. But at this point, he realizes there's no longer room for that true contemplation of how all of those decisions will unravel. It's act now, pay the price later.
Yeah. I feel like I just unpacked like 23 years of baggage and trauma. Like, that feels so much better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I agree. I must stay here and I'm gonna cry in a minute, but like, thank you. Gandalf has always been my favorite character, or one of my favorite characters from the Fellowship, just because like all of those little moments, a wizard is never late. He arrives precisely when he means to, Frodo Baggins, like all of that. And I've never gotten over Gandalf the White replacing Gandalf the Grey, and I think it's a little bit less heavy now. Thank you.
You're welcome. I feel better too. Well, not to mention, like, that exact quote. He arrived. He came back exactly when he meant to, when he was meant to. But yeah, far toss here from Lord Elrond. But I think that's it. It's well done, especially seeing it now and going back and thinking about it. Because again, we get something different out of every time that we watch it, and every time that we discuss it, it's something new, even after 23 years now. So okay, moving to the next one, because I'm sure that we'll have another epiphany of some kind. Bye, Lord Elrond, we adore you. Goodbye. Moving on to my mother. What?
Bye, Grandpappy.
Bye, Grandpa. Hello, Mother. I couldn't choose just one picture because she's fucking gorgeous.
Mommy?
So here's not like that. There's
Mommy?
Arwen, daughter of Elrond, and I forget her mother's name, and I feel bad about it. It's Celebrion, I think, who is actually, her mother is the daughter of Celeborn and Galadriel, who will bring about in just a moment here. But yeah, she is also like, she is the best. She is the female representation that we needed in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think. Because as much as she absolutely fucking loves her man and would clearly do just about anything for him, she is a warrior. She is intelligent. She is just a whole powerhouse on her own, and the only thing holding her back is her own father. And for good reason. Like, it's daddy's little girl without it being... I don't think he's that overbearing with her. But they're also dealing with, like, some huge changes in the world. And understandably, she is not pleased to be at her father's whim when it comes to certain things. But she is so much more than that. She is phenomenal. So anything you'd like to add, yeah.
Also speaking to like daddy's little girl, but also the trauma that happened to his wife and led her to having to go to the Undying Lands way before her time in a sense, and way before any of the rest of her family. Like, it makes sense that he's protective over this child of his that probably reminds him a lot of his wife, but also like probably one of the best roles she has ever played. I see her and I'm like, it's Arwen. Like, I forget the actress's name half the times because she was amazing and incredible in this role, and like you could really see the chemistry between her and Aragon Vigo. And honest to God, like, yeah, she's a warrior, she's a powerhouse, she's all of those things, but she's softness, undeniably, all of those things, and softness in a way that like war does not often make room for. I think at her heart, she's a protector, and I love that about her.
I do too. She's willing to sway with the wind, but hold her ground.
She's water.
She is water. She is 100%, and that is evident as they portrayed her as well with her abilities. I don't know, and she's, I don't know, she's exactly where she is meant to be. Like, I don't know, taking out of the movie for a moment, like, the age difference as a kid bothered me, but like, you're right, the chemistry between her and Viggo Mortensen, it was the first time I was able to recognize at my young age that these were actors, and then I was like, oh, well, they're definitely together in real life, right? No. Like, absolutely not. I don't think they even ever dated, but like, they were clearly meant to be these characters, and they played them so well. And like, she has so little screen time, but she gets her point across extremely well. I don't think that she got this role because she may have, but I don't think that she got it just because she happens to be related to Steven Tyler, you know? Like, I think that she was just right for this role because she is gentle, she is kind, she is strong, she is able to deliver her message, her, you know, her lines in such a way that like you feel safe with this character. There's a reason that she is and was as a young kid, like, she was mom. She was, I looked up to her. I think that she made decisions that were very difficult, and she stuck by them without second guessing herself ever, as much as they could tear her apart to like make that decision to be with the person that she loves and to make a difference in this world and give up an eternity of terrifying bliss. Like, I don't know.
And to that point, I think it's also, as much as she chooses him at the end, it's also being able to make the choice to let him go and to recognize that, at least in Fellowship, their responsibilities were taking them in different directions. And like, I think the movie portrays it as her being a little bit more unwilling to let go than Aragon was, especially in like giving him the necklace and stuff. But I think that just reads to me as her truly acknowledging, like, it doesn't matter where we are ever in our lives or our deaths, you will always be the love of my life. And if letting you go is the right decision for the world, I will make that choice, but not without acknowledging what you are to me, what you will always be to me, and what it will cost me to do so.
Do I love them because it's a love story?
It's a love story!
Is it because it's a love story?
I mean,
my version of love story?
I guess, but also Lord of the Rings has always been a love story.
Oh yeah.
And like, there are those aspects of romantic love in a couple of places, and I think her and Aragon are like the biggest one. But I mean, it's a love story of a familial kind. I think Lord of the Rings, and I don't know if this will be the same for you. Like, I had seen a lot of representation of found family, but I think this was the first one that really spoke to me in such a deep way that like I was really truly able to gauge the fact that like what I was looking for in friendships and in my life was not just like really good friends. It was a family, like a sense of family that I didn't always feel with my own family because of our differences in a lot of respects. But it also let me know that like you can relate to people from such different backgrounds in such a deep way without taking away those parts of yourself and without having to partition yourself into a way that is more palatable for other people. Like you can be fully yourselves with others and be respected and loved for those differences and for the similarities you share alike, and have it be meaningful and real and last a lifetime, no matter the distance, no matter the differences in standing. Like there is love in the fellowship in a way that like even these actors felt it so truly. Like they got tattoos, y'all. But like just like the reunion scene at the end of Return of the King, right? And like I think it's such the cheesiest thing still, but like that moment when they all walk into the room and there's just this light joy on all of their faces, and I was like, I want to experience that with someone, and now I get to. So thank you.
You're welcome. I also just realized I'm in here as my giraffe and not my my other Wendigo that compliments your Mothman. I'm so sorry.
I don't mind giraffe daddy. It's fine.
Oh my god. But yeah, I feel like Arwen is just so strongly her own character and so independent while still being so very like I don't know. She's
honoring her relationships with other people while still being herself.
Exactly.
Unapologetically.
Unapologetically is a good word for it.
And like she does get so little screen time, and she does get so few lines in comparison to everyone else, but like she's no less important to this story in a lot of ways. And I would argue that Liv Tyler did such a good job in portraying this character in a way that it could not be drowned out by the job that all of the other actors did. Like she was important, and Liv Tyler portrayed that importance not as like, oh look at me, I'm important, but as a quiet like, of course I'm important.
Agreed. Yeah, like, and we'll probably talk about it shortly, and we've talked about it in the other I think the very first that we did, but the fact that like she was the only, aside from Galadriel, and I guess Éowyn, she was our first introduction to a female character in this story, and like she was everything that we needed out of that. She's just, I don't know, I'm gonna start repeating myself. I just love her so goddamn much. She's perfect for this, and if she had been portrayed any other way, it would have been wrong. Like it would have been, they would have taken her too coarse. She would have been too abrasive or too like, I wouldn't call her feminine in the traditional sense. Like she is female, she has feminine energy, but she is still a product of Middle Earth, and she is still accustomed to being in that world and knowing what needs to be done to get it done, even if her own father, who can see the future, is telling her, no, this is impossible. She comes right back and says, no, this will be. Like, she's not gonna let that sit. I don't know.
She reads as capable without having to read as masculine.
You are correct. Yes. She's just exactly what we needed. Versus what we get in a future example. But anyway, any other words to say on Arwen? Because I will just gush over her.
We love you, Mommy.
Yeah, we love you, Mommy. In very different ways, it sounds like. She's just so beautiful and just so like.
I can love her in both ways.
Agree. Yeah, fair. There's a word. There's a good descriptor. I don't know. She's just not someone that they're gonna look over. You're not gonna look over this person, and it's not just because of her beauty. It's because she can hold the room in her own way. What is this that you're handing me? Interesting. Oh, hello.
Open it.
Oh my god. Oh my lord. Okay. We're gonna move on. Goodbye, mommy. Where did you get this box?
It's from the Nightmare Before Christmas Hallmark decorations I've been buying.
Incredible. Okay, these two are in here as a nod for Rivendell, because since we're primarily covering Rivendell, they're the only ones that are extremely worth mentioning. Oh, you know who I did forget was Lindir. We do see Lindir really briefly in not only Lord of the Rings, but also The Hobbit. He is, the way that he's portrayed in that media is as like an he kind of reminds me of a young Elrond, but in a much more functional position. He's kind of like his assistant, or just like, what are they called?
Butler, head of household,
Yeah. Steward, kind of that kind of thing. Like he's an intelligent character. He seems to be kind of someone that Elrond can place a lot of trust in. But again, he's a very brief character. He's played by the other half of the Flight of the Conchords. I forget his name, and I feel awful about it, but if you've ever seen Moana, the guy who plays the big crustacean, the big crab, he's that...
I'm shiny!
Yeah, he's the other half of that musical, that band, which I don't know if they're still active. But anyway, that's a brief aside for Lindir. He's not super important, but we do get glimpses of him, and I believe he is fairly well liked by the fandom. And then of course we have Elladan and Elrohir, who are Elrond's twin sons. Again, very brief nods. I believe they were actually Hugo Weaving's own sons, portrayed the twins. And in the actual Return of the King, they are depicted, as seen here, as reforging Aragorn's ancestral sword. Which, yeah.
Big knife.
Yeah, big knife. They're not that important. I felt we should give them a nod. They're also extremely heavily explored in some of the video games, but they're not, and I think they may have a little more to do in the books themselves. I'm sure they're like a footnote or like a whole ass chapter of the index that Tolkien wrote, but like they're important enough to the fact that Elrond had other children, and depicting him as a father, but also as having very honorable family members who actively did kind of their own thing in the video games. Like they went and they were out there actually actively helping the war efforts. So
I think one of my favorite things about Elrond and Galadriel and like their familial relationship, incidentally, is the fact that I saw a post on Tumblr once that was talking about how Sauron must have been like so mad about his line because it really connected kind of all of the people that ever got on his nerves and that he could have ever had anything to fear into Arwen, who was like, yeah, you're reforging the sword now. And also just like acknowledging that like this line is so important because they are capable of doing their own thing and they are capable of doing good in Middle Earth, and kind of like not care that the other elves are probably like, y'all are a little bit too involved.
I bet this whole family just like pissed off a lot of people, just the way that they just refuse to fucking stop. Like, oh, that's who it is. Lindir, perfect example of fucking Arwen being escorted to the Greylands, to the ships, and like, or to the Greyhaven. Lindir is the one that like stops and turns around and sees Arwen and is like, where the fuck are you going? And like I think that's
My
the
lady.
perfect yeah, like that's exactly the perfect example of like this whole family is just a thorn in these people's side while still being in the seat of power and just being
I
like
just realized. No, listen to me. I just realized Galadriel in Rings of Power jumps off a whole fucking ship on her way to the Undying Lands. How did they ever think that sending her granddaughter would work?
the continuity without that being an actual part of it, like they did their research, but you're right that they just refused to say like say stop in a lot of ways. Like just incredible. What a beautiful family. What a wonderful, wonderful family. And I think even these two, I don't want to misstate, but I'm pretty sure that these two ended up staying behind after everything was said and done. But I could be wrong. I don't think they chose to be mortal in the way that their family can, but I don't believe they were like, I'm ready to go. So I don't know. What a pain in the ass that family is. I love them.
I feel like Elrond was absolutely one of those parents who was like, oh, you did this, and other people are saying I should punish you for it. Well, you really did do it this time, doing this thing that you did. Well, I guess that your punishment is getting to do exactly the thing that you wanted to, because everyone else would see it as a punishment. But we understand that it is absolutely what you want to do, but you have to look upset. This lady told me to yell at you. And it's that TikTok, right? Of like the Mexican woman yelling in Spanish at her kid. Like, this white lady told me to yell at you about this thing. You didn't do anything wrong, but I need you to look scared. More scared. Look scared. Don't worry. After this, I'm buying you ice cream.
Like, you did a good job. Now just cry a little bit for me. Like we practiced now. Come on. What a piece of shit family. You love to see it. We also have an honorable mention, speaking of family, Aragorn, who is not an elf, but since we were talking about Rivendell, he is not only, and here's where it's a little weird, but he is the adopted son of Elrond after what happened with, I forget the full story, but he and his mother fled to Rivendell, and he was ultimately raised by Elrond, and that is obviously presumably where he fell in love with and got to be with Arwen. I accidentally clicked, so if you have anything else, if we need to keep talking about Aragorn, I will find a way to go back. But
We'll get to him later. It's okay.
that's fair, because he is still man. So moving on to Lothlorien, my actual fun little fact. This would be the place that I'd ultimately want to live the rest of my days. I would also like to, really briefly, I meant to say it at the top, all of the images that I'm using are courtesy of Google Images. I don't have all of the, like, what's it called? I don't have the...
Critic links.
I don't have exact critic links, so if I get in trouble, I get in trouble. But I Google imaged a lot of it, and it was primarily from, like, resources of Lord of the Rings. But that is also why some of the pixelation is happening. But anyway, here we have the Fellowship of the Ring minus Gandalf walking into Lothlorien. We primarily do see Lothlorien in the evening time. The only time we don't see it is when they first arrive in the forest, and they are met by a group of rangers. But yeah, I think it's the prettiest elvish land, personally.
I think it reads very much of what we would assume with like Fey elves.
Yeah.
Versus like Elrond's reads as like city elves in nature, but city elves, and this reads as Fey elves without the city.
Yeah.
But not as rural as Mirkwood, to be clear.
That's the interesting thing is when I was doing some of the research is that a lot of people refer to the Lothlorien elves as wood elves. And I wonder then, I guess the Mirkwood elves would be more swamp elves if we're getting technical.
Maybe, yeah, like
I mean, I compared them to the Appalachian people, or Appalachia, and not in a bad way, like mad respect for the people who can elk out a living out there and have that wonderful culture. But I think that they are very much just like in their hidey holes.
Yeah, it's we don't really see it, but I feel like if we do reckon, or if we say similar to like Appalachia or Australia, it's like a harder living, but it's also a like it's a self-enforced isolation. So
I would
of
say
course they
cave
survive.
elves,
Yeah,
given like the way that a lot of their structures were built into rock and not
You're right.
necessarily
You're
out of
right.
rock like Rivendell. Like Rivendell is rivers, right? And like city and like more of a port town kind of feeling, like a place of commerce. Like again, that political power. Like this joining of a library of Alexandria kind of created realm. This reads more as like woodland elves of like living with the woods and living as structures that like grow out of trees versus made out of trees and all of that. And Mirkwood reads very much as like we carved our existence out of rock and we refuse to leave.
That's yeah.
Anyway, I'm gonna pull a Snow and go to the bathroom. Snow, go ahead and continue the podcast. But don't leave grandmommy until I'm back.
I will not. So introducing, at the seat of power of Lothlorien is the lovely Galadriel, which I mentioned previously actually had 2 different names previous. Her mother and her father called her separate things, and her husband, Celeborn, actually named her Galadriel, and that seems to be what she stuck with. If we want to get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty as far as the media goes. Oh, I have an email. What's interesting is that she already has the name Galadriel in fucking Rings of Power, even though she has not, to our knowledge, married to Celeborn. So again, like, they really decided to kind of go their own way and add their own stuff to move the plot forward, it feels like. And again, I will say that they have done a very good job of that addition, but this is what we have for Rings of Power, the younger Galadriel, and then of course the more regal looking state, and then the great betrayal of swamp monster Galadriel.
She still looks hot that way.
I disagree. She just scares the shit out of me. I don't know what it is. It just was not a good time. But yeah, she really been through it, I feel like. And I think that she also gets very little screen time while still holding her own. Like, yes, we have Celeborn, we have her husband constantly with her in Lord of the Rings, but he's a side note. Like, he introduces himself, and then the rest of the time it's just nothing but this fucking badass woman who also kind of has her own way of pulling strings. And with the context more now of Rings of Power, I think it makes more sense now why she was hands-on but not hands-on. Like, she has her trials and tribulations, as we saw here, but like, she also passes those issues. She passes that. She suffered the consequences of her actions in the past, and now she is overcoming whatever it is that those tests that she had to get through. She refuses to leave Middle Earth until everything has been said and done. She leaves on what is supposed to be the final ship, but she sticks around just long enough to make sure that things get done. And she, unlike Elrond, she does not stand in the way of a lot of things. She does test Frodo and the rest of the Fellowship, but I think it's more in the same way that she had to test herself. She wanted to make sure they had the mettle to go through with this. And am I going to put my eggs in this basket, or am I going to be along with the rest of the elves and fuck off? And she decides not to be the fuck offingest of people, and she actually actively helps. And we really don't see, after this one moment, we really don't see any hesitation from her, unlike Elrond, who has his own shit going on with his daughter. I think that she's, like, and you would think that she would, given that she is Arwen's grandmother, but I also think that it's like, if you really want to go into a larger, broad spectrum of things, it's almost like she was like, yeah, everyone in the family has things that they, like, Elrond's not her blood, Arwen is. Arwen had her own thing to get through, her own ship to jump off of, and she's letting her do it. She's not second-guessing Arwen's choices. She's not necessarily supporting them, but I don't think she has time to support them. I think she just, Arwen does her thing, Galadriel doesn't even mention it and just moves on. Like, just continues to help the war effort.
I think if she did have a reaction, it would be like the Abuelita in One Day at a Time, the remake, where Elena comes out as gay and she has like that 10-second like religious fallout, and then is like, but God said that you should love everyone, especially your own family. Like, okay, I love her. The end. I think that would be kind of Galadriel's situation of like, oh my God, why did you? Oh, okay.
But like also, oh yeah, I did the same thing, so okay.
Yeah, and speaking of, I know that you put them as like right brain artistic. I would argue right brain artistic in like the healing sense, especially because of what we're seeing in Rings of Power. I think it adds flavor to the fact that she is kind of like in this place, like this small piece of heaven in Middle Earth. Like, she's not going to the Undying Lands, but she's gonna bring the Undying Lands to Middle Earth kind of respect. Because I feel like in that place, in her lands, it is where they get that true brief break, that true bit of healing after the mines. And I think it reads as like right brain artistic, but right brain artistic in like that self-healing phase. And you mentioned like she tests their metal to see if like she wants to put her eggs in the basket. I would argue further, she's testing their metals to see if like it's okay to put her trust in them, like to see that they can make it, not just because she wants to fuck off, but because she needs to know if it's time for her to pick up her sword again. Because I think she'd be like, if you can't get it done, I will. But I think like Swamp Monster, like we've talked about it again before, like in length, because you had such a problem with this moment and felt so betrayed with it. And I was like, I need you. I was like, I understand that and I respect that feeling, but I need you to understand how I read it. And I'll share that with our audience, which is I read this moment as her last test for herself. Like that moment of needing to be sure that she had made all of the right decisions up to this moment, to be sure in herself that like she could let go of that temptation. And to do so, she had to confront it directly. Like, there was no pretending it didn't exist. There was no challenging it. Like, Rings of Power, and I think this moment in the movie it makes it very clear that Galadriel is very bad at setting aside the things that upset her. And she has learned that about herself and has decided to take the path that is the most direct and confronting this dark aspect of herself, almost to, like, be able to set it aside and acknowledge, oh, this bad piece of me, or like this negative aspect of me, of course exists. It exists for everyone, as it should. But I'm going to acknowledge it and hold it and give it space long enough to realize that it is not all that I am and that it does not define me in any meaningful way. Because the relief after that moment, remember? I pointed it out to you and you were able to see it. Like the relief after that moment where she does that whole speech to the ring and it's just like, oh, it's done. It's that's all. Like, I don't need it. That's it. Like, I'm done. And also, just to bring it back around to your granddad, her and her son-in-law love to chisme, so much so that they develop telepathy, apparently, and can converse from their two realms in their minds.
Chisme.
Gossip.
Ah, you're correct.
But like
Oh,
juicy,
that's a good
like
way
the
of putting
tea.
it, yeah.
Like Cheeseman does it better than tea, because tea always sounds like you want to get all the negative stuff. Cheeseman is like, we just want to talk shit, and it's not negatively, not necessarily good or bad. It's like, oh, did you hear that Aragon saw his boyfriend? What's his face again?
It's productive shit talking.
Yes, it's a Cheeseman.
Okay, I get it now. I get it. Okay. Yeah, I still have my reservations for like other reasons, but they're not important. It just I still, when I watch it, need that reassurance because I don't read it that way. I don't read it as relief. I read it as like, and it's such a negative take, but like, it's a. I really want this, but I'm not gonna take it because I don't know, like it.
I mean, even
I
if
don't
it is
know.
that, even if it's I really want this, but I'm not gonna take it because it's not the right thing to do, then she's still actively making a choice to be good, bro.
I know. I don't know.
The last thing I will comment about Galadriel is like a beauty in her age and like a big deal. TM. And Gimli requests how many hairs, James? Do you remember how many hairs he requests?
He requests exactly 1, and she gives him 3.
And this is a big deal because Gimli, up to this point, has been shit-talking the elves up and down, bro. Like, just shit-talking the elves with Legolas, who is his husband and best friend. And then he sees this beautiful woman and is like, I asked her for a hair, and like is happy, like giddy as a child. And Legolas is like, oh, she gave me 3. And okay, like sounds weird, right? Like, dude asked for your hair, you gave him 3. The reason it's a big fucking deal is because apparently other people have asked her similar things or favors such as these because she is so beautiful and like everybody wants grandmommy. And she said no to other elves who like in the strictest sense would have been in Legolas's understanding of the world more deserving, at least of his initial take of the situation. So I think that moment where like Gimli's like, oh, she gave me 3, Legolas is like, oh, I can fuck with this guy then. Like great grandma Galadriel says this guy's good, so I can fuck with this guy. Okay.
Yeah, like that's especially with that context of knowing that others had asked her for hair or for I think I can't remember the exact story, but I believe that either it was 3 people before him that had tried to court her or who had asked for hair or like favors from her.
I think.
Yeah, or it was like 1 person asking for 3. There was something very significant with that context, and then seeing exactly what you say, like Legolas's little smirk or little like soft smile after that he divulges the fact that she gave him the hair, like knowing that, and Legolas knowing that, like you're right, he's much more like, okay, we could, not only have I been battle tested with this dwarf, but the fact that he's earned her trust and earned this honor from her really, like, it doesn't change their relationship, it grows their relationship in such a positive way. And I'm also really curious to know what she saw in Gimli for her to be like, this one dwarf, like we can absolutely place this in his hands and know that he'll take care of it. And I'd like to think that she saw some nobility in him and like the ability to put things aside, moving forward to like Helm's Deep, where he's like, could you die next to a friend, not just an elf or whatever. Like, it's just, I'd love to know what she saw in him to know this would be something that she wouldn't regret and not just a bolster to his like
ego.
Yeah.
I think a noble heart, a good heart. I think Gimli does carry a lot of attitudes with him in the early on movies and like scenes of those movies that make him very hard to like at times, especially in his relationship with the elves. In like a good way, I think he's critical of the elves in a way that we should all fucking be. Tolkien, listen to your characters, bro. But I think Legolas was so ready and willing to see the kind of same insidious nature in Gimli that other dwarves carried with them because of like their gold sickness or whatever you want to call it, right? Like this hunger for power. And Gimli is there because it's his job to be there as like a representative of his people, but he's there because he honestly acknowledges it's the right thing to do. And I think the first scene in that you really see that Gimli is like ride or die for the right thing to do is when he tries to destroy the ring. Because like everyone else is fighting over who gets to take the ring home, and of course Gimli is like, I'm here because obviously like no one else should get to have it either, but like we should get to have it, but like he doesn't really want it in that sense. He wants it so that other people can have it, which is very middle child of him. But I think in that respect that Gimli's like the first one to be like, oh, we have to destroy it, cool, and like whacks it with his axe and like obviously pays the price for that. But I think she sees in Gimli the best of the dwarves, like what we saw in Durian and Disa, and like that young culture. She sees not a person stuck in ways of old, but a person who has been active in the rebuilding of his people and who wants nothing more but peace for Middle Earth and for all good things of Middle Earth, who wants to enjoy life in a good way. And I think Gimli could very easily be brushed off as a warmongering character, especially in the way that he's competitive about how many orcs they kill and all of that. And like his ego gets in the way in certain things of like dwarves aren't thrown, we jump and all of that. To like the scenes where he's like, you're gonna have to throw me and all of this stuff, and like being open with the people he cares about his shortcomings in a way that's meaningful and willing to enjoy that life with them without letting the differences in the race to get in the way. Again, would you be okay with dying alongside a friend? I was like, fuck.
I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right. I guess I've never really thought about it extremely, like, what she could have seen. Because we also know that they've been there for a couple of months or so in the book. They don't tell us that very well in the movies, but they're there for a while resting for the rest of their journey. And, like, I'm sure there are other things that he did while he was there that were admirable and honorable, and I'm sure that there was enough growth in their relationships that would have warranted that sort of gifting. But it is interesting to, like, the fact that she allowed him to stay at all was kind of huge to allow any of them to stay in her realm, when really she didn't have to. Like, they went in there knowing that these guys were, like, it may not be wise to pass through here, and then they allowed them to stay a while was a pretty big deal. And I'm sure that's a lot of that has to do with all of their desires and them coming to terms with what actually needs to happen. It just was skimmed over so quickly for the audience that, like, they're dealing with the death of Gandalf, and they're dealing with realizing that this isn't just some adventure that they're going on, some trip. There is danger and there are consequences, and she's there to provide them a safe haven, however brief a period of time, and to, going back again, provide them with what they need to get through some of that. So it's just interesting to see, like, they really skim over her involvement, and it's again, going back, interesting to see where she started, and for them to develop her in such a well done way to inform her actions later on, that it's like it's just really well done. And I have a much greater appreciation for Galadriel. She was never my absolute favorite character, but she she's grown on me in a way that having you kind of put some of her into context, like her like reactions to things and the fact that she had to get over that speed bump before she had to put out her own fire before helping others. And I think that happened exactly perfectly for her. Like, they brought the one thing that was stopping her directly to her door, and she just took it and ran. So I don't know. It's she's a difficult character for me, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like it's fun to unpack.
Yeah, and I think also the Ring of Powers has given me the ability to look at her and be like, well, she could have been more involved in the war when I first like watched Lord of the Rings and all of that, and like could have gone into battle, like she's an actual fighter. But then like looking at where she is in Rings of Power, I think it makes more sense for me why she elected not to. Because for her, I think there is this sense of she put down the sword, and if she were to pick it up, she doesn't know if she could lay it down again. I think her PTSD is very real, and I think she has worked so hard to heal from like the hatred that consumed her for so long, that like she recognizes now that what she can offer for other people is that space that she has had to create for herself in order to heal. And like, yeah, in the movies it reads like overnight at most, maybe 2-3 days, and you know, the books it's much longer. But I think that just makes it more meaningful that she did create the space, that she does give them these things that they need to carry forward. It's beautiful.
Agreed. Also, I have to pee, so riff however you need to, and then I'll be right back.
Change the slide. So here is side piece number 1, Kellenborn. I honestly did not know he was Galadriel's anything when I first watched the movies. I like realized after the fact that like she was married and had a husband and was not a single lady, much to my dismay. But again, he is the man who won the heart of one of the most beautiful elves and most sought after elves in her age, her generation, and genuinely probably other generations aside from that. And I think it speaks to his character that she saw who he was and all that he was and decided, oh yeah, this is the guy for me. This is the one that I'm gonna have children with and stuff. But also kind of talking to who she was in the Rings of Power and what she needed to do to heal. Even before Rings of Power, I think I've always viewed this character as somebody who is very much a himbo, like drinks his respect women juice, and he's probably very intelligent, but like purposely does not try to outshine his wife. He is comfortable with who he is and all that he is, and he leaves space for his wife to be all that she is without feeling like she outshines him, because like in his head, of course, she's going to outshine him. But I think he is exactly what she needed in a relationship, and I think he gives her the space that she needs to heal.
I agree. Like, it's really hard not to agree with the himbo thing. Like, he is actually, if we want to go into the more like tiered out ways of elves, he is higher ranking than her. He is a Sindarin elf, which is higher than her. I think she's Noldor. He is descended from the highest tier of their original like tribes, but he is also just like he has the gravitas that he requires. And I don't think he's shirking any responsibilities that he may have, but I think you're exactly right in that he's allowing her the space, and may have always allowed her the space to not only heal, but to do what she needs to do, and that once she's ready to go, he'll be ready to go. He is the ultimate support system for her. Like, in the movies, we see very little of him, but he is always very well put together, very astute and very like reserved. And I think that that's how they balance one another out. I think somewhere deep down in Galadriel, we see that she is very much a firecracker in her own way, as much as an elf can be. Whereas Celeborn, yeah, it's very tumultuous. I think that he levels her out in a way that no other elf would be able to. I think that all the other elves, especially again seeing her in Rings of Power, like, she might have been too much for anyone else to handle, or she would have been like shrugged off as being just too much of a nuisance, and he's just like, no, that's my wife. Fuck yeah.
Yeah, she would have been made less. I think he's very much an example of still waters run deep. And I think she expresses that deepness for him enough that he feels comfortable just being like, what up? Here's my wife. But in like Adam's family way, you know, like, this is my wife and I'm in love with her and I'm going to show her that I love her, and none of you need to be privy to that. And if you happen to be, cool, but I don't need to prove shit to you. She knows what I'm about.
It's very, very comfortable in their relationship. Very much so. He is a little bit of the Gomez to her Morticia. Without the extra that I seem to remember them having.
Yeah, I think he would read more as Morticia, and she would read more as Gomez, if that makes sense.
That's hilarious, and yes.
Like,
Agreed.
Morticia is the more laid-back, relaxed one, and Gomez is like, yes! Life! And I think that's how Galadriel and him read, where she's more like, yes, of course, these things, but like as much as an elf can be.
And that's what's not, because again, there's not a whole lot that we see of him, but like he really is just kind of the embodiment of the elvish reserve. But you also do get to see some of his sense of humor. Like, he's the, I guess he's the grandfather-in-law of Aragorn, and you do get a glimpse, I forget the exact context, but I'm pretty sure we see a glimpse of that relationship with Aragorn. Like, they're not married yet or anything, but there's an understanding between the two of them that, like, I feel like Celeborn really respects and can get behind Aragorn as a person, as a warrior, as, you know, the person who's going to get things done.
An honorable man.
Yeah, and not getting overly involved with that, but also, and as we've seen, they get what they need. I don't think Celeborn had a small hand in that. I think that he really did provide. He helped to provide a lot of the things, if not convinced some of the other elves very possibly to get on board. Like, maybe that's part of his role. Outside of it, we can conjecture all we want, but like, he may be the one that's just like, look, my wife's doing this, she has my full support, we're gonna support these people, I don't want to hear anything about it, get it done. Like,
yeah,
kind of
I
thing.
feel like the relationship would very much read as Galadriel's like, we're gonna prepare them for the journey and not know the logistics of doing that, whereas he's like in the background going like, they need these cloaks, these are hobbit-sized people, so like dwarves, but like make sure they're appropriate to their sizes. Also, they don't wear shoes. Stop bringing me shoes for the hobbits. They didn't lose their shoes. They don't wear shoes.
Stop bringing me shoes for
we
these
need
hobbits.
lambus bread. We need a lot of it. No, I know that that's enough for 9 people.
These are hobbits we're
elves,
talking about.
but like, these are hobbits. Like, we need so much more than that. Like, you need to pack the most that we have. That's still not enough. And like, Galadriel's like, oh yes, here are these gifts that I'm giving you. And he's like, everything has to go off without a hitch. So my wife needs to look great in this shot. Oh, the dwarf asked you for hair and you want to know if I'm cool with it? Like, of course I'm cool with it. He's in love. He like sees you for all that you are. Yes, give him your hair.
Like, I want more of Celeborn, just in general. But I like that idea of him getting all of that. Like, how much research did he have to do? Or was it just him observing the hobbits and going, wow, 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 that's food. That's we're okay, we need someone to go out and gather some more food because all of our stocks are going away. It's just go get food, make a lot of it. This
Apparently,
yeah.
they eat more than one breakfast. They have a thing called second breakfast, and we must account for that in their reserves.
This was the hobbits were there, like them getting ready for their great grandchildren, essentially, who they probably never got to meet, but whatever.
I mean, they do go to the Undying Lands, but it's unclear how long after Return of the King that they leave. So I'd like to think they stuck around long enough to meet one of them. Additionally, I would like to add, you said that he has an understanding with Aragorn, and like, I agree, but I also kind of read that as he's definitely given that man a shovel talk, and it was the most polite shovel talk Aragorn has ever received, and it's the one that scares him the most.
Shovel talk? Oh, like if you
I'll
fuck
make
this
you
up?
disappear. Yeah, and I think out of everyone, he would be most afraid of Celeborn, because like Celeborn would make it look like an accident in a believable way.
Celeborn's the Hufflepuff that doesn't need any help to get rid of a body.
Yeah, he's in a family of Slytherins, and he's just like, yes, my granddaughter takes after me.
That's awesome. But what a good guy. And, like, what a handsome boy as well.
He is a handsome boy.
Let's see. So I did want to get this one in here, if we're moving along a little bit. My more than honorable mention was Haldir, who...
I'm still angry about it.
Me too. He was the most important elf to me when I was very young because A, Craig Parker is a very handsome man, and B, I think I just wanted to be him. He was like gender envy and goals, if you could believe it. But the first introduction we get to this elf is him finding the party because he claims that the dwarf was breathing too loud. And if that isn't some sass and some bullshit, I don't know what is. Like, beautiful.
Agreed. And he dies in Helm's Deep, guys, and I'm still upset about it.
Yeah, he didn't die in the books either. Like, people were pissed off about it. I remember people being really upset because they were like, why did they do this? Like, I know they did it for effect, but why?
I think it made sense. Like, him and Aragorn were, like, bros. Like, they're clearly friends. Like, they clearly hanged. And like, I think it adds weight to the decision for the elves to fight. Because I think that moment for me was when I saw the elves as the most mortal. Like, they are immortal creatures. They are, in a sense, more than the rest of us. But it was that first moment that I really perceived their lives as, like, not just valuable because of, like, their breath of life. Their breath of life, like, their knowledge and all of that, but, like, their value in, like, the loss of those relationships, if that makes any sense. Because up until this point, they were so, like, Legolas, especially as, like, the main portrayal of elves that we got, held himself apart from the Fellowship in a lot of ways, I think, early on, that, like, Helm's Deep began to rectify, amongst other events, correct? But I think he was the first instance that we got of, like, an elf with a relationship that seemed more meaningful than that paternalistic, like, we know what's best feel that the others give off, whether they're trying to or not. Like, he was so involved and invested that he came to Helm's Deep, and, like, he led this battalion of elves who probably were there without permission, let's be honest, and decided to do this thing. And I understand why that would be upsetting if he didn't die in the books, but I found it so meaningful myself. Like, it was so sad. I am angry about it, but I felt that it did give all of it more gravitas. Like, it did give it more of a weight because it's the first time that you really recognize that they aren't taking this lightly, and they don't necessarily value their lives more than the mortal men around them. It's just that they have forgotten how to have this fight with the people around them. And I think Rings of Power gives us, again, that window to see, like, exactly how differently elves perceive time from us. But the fact that like he and his soldiers stood their ground alongside all of these men and boys, right? And valued their lives just as much was important. And I'm sad that he died, but I do think it makes a part of that movie a little bit more meaningful.
You're right. He was a huge casualty, but it was representative of something greater. Like the fact not only that they really weren't meant to be there. They shouldn't have been there. But it was the first breaking of these long-held kind of traditions and boundaries of men and elves. Like they've had their differences, and it's not like they're actively at each other's throats. And they definitely, because I think they even mention, right, that there are certain terms that they will meet in certain times of need, but like for them to just show up and for Haldir to be at the front of that after he gave them such a cold welcome to the land, like not only is that a huge step for him as an individual, but for their entire group of people. It's the first time we see the elves getting truly involved, because we don't see that step taken again until Return of the King, and even then they only really provide as much as probably about half as much as they can, because at this point most of these elves have got to be mostly volunteers, I would say.
Yeah, because
so many of them are fucking off, and like rightfully so. Like their time is over, and who's gonna be like, oh yeah, let me go fight in someone else's war? But it's really not someone else's war, and I think that's what Haldir sees, is that this is bigger than me, and this is bigger than some petty disagreement or whatever. And maybe even seeing Legolas like caravanning around with these guys and being like, yeah, I would die for these people. Like Haldir clearly goes from 0 to 100 of that coldness towards these people to we're gonna go out in a big way.
I think the elves lost sight of their relationships to others because of how fleeting those relationships felt to them, that they stopped trying to encourage them and develop them in meaningful ways. And so like this character and like that instance is important because it shows that they are still capable of it and still like relationally important to Middle Earth. And also I think it's that first moment where like you really do see them understand their destiny as intertwining with all of these peoples, because up until this point we know them as leading, we know them as involved, but only as like puppet masters or hey Flash, as like people who are like involved in like facilitating things but not taking action. Like that's not their place anymore, and he decides to throw that convention completely out for the first time in generations and is like, no, our fates are attached to theirs, our lives are as valuable as theirs are as valuable as ours. Like of course it is our place to stand here with these men and die or live in the same breath. We are of Middle Earth as much as we are leaving Middle Earth, and so we honor our intertwined destinies until the point that they truly end, and they are not yet over.
Yeah, I think he just is, as with many of these characters, he is the embodiment of one ideal or theme or another. And like, while there's still that part of me that thinks they did him so dirty, but putting it in that context, I do think that it was important that he was an unfortunate loss. Like, it sucks, but he played his role and he played it to perfection, which I think is something that he would have appreciated, what he would have liked. Or I can just believe that he went to America.
He went to America. Yeah, and I think the way that they show us him dying is intentional in that eye contact, in that like disbelief that this is happening to him, but also in like understanding that this has been happening for so long to so many people. I think the elves lost touch with what death means in the fact that so few of them die unless
They've just been so stagnant for so long.
yeah, and I think this is the first sign of growth. And in that piece, I think a lot more elves stayed than we know of. In that same sort of like decision to like live out their lives in Middle Earth, and maybe like I think he would have been one of them in the movies, at least, if he had had the opportunity to stay and grow those relationships just a little bit longer. And for them, death might have still been going to the Undying Lands when they felt their time was over. But I think it would have felt more like a human death than an elvish one at that point, if they had stayed and made that choice.
Agreed. I wonder what it is for some of them, if they're worried about becoming so involved with humanity or with other races that they lose part of their elvish, I hesitate to say purity, but that's really kind of how it reads. And like he seems so we don't know much about him other than what we see, and he really does have that air about him that says that he really would have had no other interaction beyond this with the other goings-on of the world, because he's the head of the Rangers. Like, he's meant to stay and defend that home. Everything in him is telling him to defend the land that is his, and then he goes on this out on a huge limb to see the world in a bigger way, and it pays off, but he doesn't get to live to see it. And I wonder if other elves worry about those sorts of things, like if that isn't like a cautionary tale for them, where they're like, if I leave home, I'm gonna lose
lost,
who I am.
so it absolutely is.
Yeah.
But I think that's why it's important. I think his story speaks to that stagnation that has been ongoing for the elves. Like in Rings of Power, we see them as a lively culture, not as like this fading monument or this fading light. We see them as this growing thing that is interacting with the world in more meaningful ways than any of the Lord of the Rings or even the Hobbit movies ever portrayed, right? And I think he steps out of that stagnation into this new growth and like unfortunately dies for it. But I think, like, how many kids in Rohan born after that are named Heldir? You know?
So many. They better be, because like this one fucking elf probably just saved so many, like gave them enough time to continue on the way that they did. And I don't know, I love Aldir. He's such a good boy and such an asshole and so wonderful. Like, the more character development in the 30 minutes that we see him than some characters in other media like ever. Like, so
yes, his death is sad and should be grieved, and of course it can make you angry, especially if it's not true to the book, whatever, guys. But like, does it make it, like, is it just for the shock value? No, I don't think so. I think it was meant to mean something, and it did.
100%. All right, who we got next? Goodbye, handsome boy.
Goodbye, handsome man. Hey!
Mirkwood. We probably won't spend as much time, I say, as we probably will. But Mirkwood is, like we said at the beginning, more seen in the Hobbit series. It is, you're right, they are more just dug into the stone and things like that. While they do have quite a bit of nature around them, they are in their hidey hole.
Mole people.
Yeah. 100%. And they are. What's interesting is we do see that they're entrenched a little bit, and they're surrounded now by the big spiders, by the ones that, oh, I forget what they've come down from the mountains, they say.
Yeah.
And like I wonder how much of that is them having been complacent and not like tending to the land around them. Like in some ways, as much as their leadership fights the fact that they hate the dwarves and that they're nothing like them, and you know, we would never do this the way that you've done this, and we, you know, like we are not same. They ended up doing exactly the same thing. They stayed in their hidey hole. They've let that area just go to waste. They are just not paying attention to the rest of the world, and it's like they're waiting on something, but they're not noticing things going on around them. And it does probably go back to the fact that they live so long, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, like it's not of their concern. They'll take care of it when they get around to it. They're depressed.
Yeah, this is depression.
This
100%.
is depression. And I think also, like, you know, their one interaction with the outside world is really like those barges of wine from Lake Town. And like, if that don't speak to depression, bitch.
Yeah. And it is, as far as we see them, it is very heavily driven by this one fucking asshole, and the fact that he is validly mourning the death of his wife, and the fact that, like, his whole motivation that we see is, most of his motivation is thrown in there from fucking wanting just those goddamn crystals back of his wife's, the stars. And like, he's just such a dick. I can't stand fucking Thranduil.
I agree.
Everyone was so hot for him, and he's just such a pain in the ass.
I can't fix him, and I don't want to.
That is your MO most of the time, is I can fix him. No.
No.
Validly, you do not want to fix this one fucking asshole.
Like, I think he... I can't think of the word. Revels? He enjoys his grief too much, if that makes any sense.
He likes sitting in it. He revels in it.
That's the word. He revels in his grief.
Which is, it's valid, but like he is the steward. He is the king of this entire group of people, and they're just like down there wasting away. Not, I mean, I'm sure they don't see it that way, but it just, it's like,
I think
I just
his
can't stand
grief
him.
would be more. I'd be more compassionate about his grief if he didn't drag everyone else along with him in it.
Yeah, and not to mention his son, who like ultimately gets away from it. And what kills me about this character is that there is good in him. Like, we see him, he ignores his son for so long, and his son is clearly, the way that they're portraying it, Legolas is reaching out to him so often, and like he doesn't want to live the life that his father is placing in front of the people, but like his father is just so dead set on just bathing in his sadness that he ends up losing his own son to greater things, which is a good thing ultimately for this world and for this story. But like, I think part of it is I don't like how they did it in the movie. I don't know if it was anything in the books, but like all of a sudden at the end of the movie, spoilers, but he's just like, he's been fighting his son on this love of Tauriel this whole time, and like all the bullshit, and then all of a sudden he's like, you're, you know, basically without telling him he loves him, tells Legolas that he loves him, and oh, by the way, there's this kid that you should totally go and look after. And like, just heal, both of you heal your, like, you just opened the door.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also it, I forgot my thought now, but like, it reads so poorly for so many reasons. but I think his unwillingness to see his son for what he is. And Legolas is so unable to break away from it. Because, that's what it was. Legolas, in those movies, in the Hobbit movies, it very much reads as a Faramir character.
It does. It absolutely reads like a Faramir character. But he's not... I still don't hate Thranduil as much as I hate fucking Denethor. But
Agreed.
I am on board with you. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
He reads somewhere between Faramir and Boromir, like still longing for that acceptance and approval, but also being willing to be like, no, fuck you.
Still having a spine. Which reads true. But like, I feel bad there's not a whole lot that we can say that's very positive about Thranduil. And again, he may have been portrayed in a slightly better light in the book or in other media, but like, and to be fair, what's his fuck did a great job portraying him. I always forget his name.
Lee Pace,
pushing up daisies, all that good stuff. But it's just so difficult to
care about him when he cares so little for himself.
Yeah, and not to
So
mention,
much at the same time,
it's like they tried to make him this way so that we would forget about what a piece of shit Thorin was starting to be, but it just made everything feel worse. Like, I didn't want to cheer for either of them.
it was a parallel.
Yeah, and
Like, look what you will become in your obsession.
yeah, and oh god, I almost wish that they would have put Tauriel in there as a romantic interest for Thranduil to like pull him out of that, or at least because I think that's what they tried to do, was because towards the end it's just them two.
How it read at the end.
Yeah, it's not even that they were romantic. Like, if they'd set it up a little better, maybe, and like she wouldn't have been able to heal him or quote unquote fix him, but I think that they were set up in a way to understand each other that they didn't do enough to develop. And it was just bad choices all around. Like,
Yeah,
they could have done the whole series with less of this character and done a better job.
Yeah, and I think the ending would have read better if they had developed that more, because there is that understanding at the end, but it's at the very end, and it just reads so poorly given every choice he has made. But in that moment at the end, there is that sense of like, oh, you lost your person, and it reads to me as, this is your new stepmommy, because we can both understand
we can wallow
each other,
in our shit
grieve
together.
together, yeah. In a bad way, not in a, like, we can have companionship in each other. It's like, no, we're just gonna miss people together in the same room.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just, it is a shame. Because that, I've been trying to put my finger on it for years. And, like, I know people who are just head over heels for this character. And, oh, he's so tragic and everything else. And it's like, yeah, but give me some redeeming quality. Like, they
Yeah, I
tried.
pass on him, bro.
They really tried to give him some redeeming quality. But given the context of the other characters in the show, or in the movie, and, like, what else was going on, it just, it was poorly executed. I don't know. Like, or at least put him with Bard and develop more of the relationship with Bard, you know? Like, just anything for this guy.
Give us something worth having.
Yeah.
There's none there.
And it didn't even make up for it, the fact that he came in and was just a whole badass. I will give him his mount, his fucking red elk or whatever it was. Fucking beautiful masterpiece. Boop! Masterpiece of a fucking animal. But, like, that's what I'll always remember about him, is his badass mount, and his swords are gorgeous, and his armor. But, like, nothing else.
He has had a long time to think of as aesthetic and thinks of nothing else other than his dead wife.
Yeah, he is the arrogance and vanity of the elves that everyone sees the elves as having.
And it makes sense that Legolas read the way he did in the first movie. Like, buddy, you came a long way, but still, bro.
Yeah. Although it does give you an appreciation. Like, Legolas could have been a lot worse of a person, and he clearly, like, did a decent job of leveling himself out. So, fuck this guy. Goodbye. Good old Legolas. I'm gonna let you take this one.
Let me talk to you about Legolas. I did not like him at first. His entire redeeming relationship for me was Gimli. Like, he had a nice relationship with Aragorn, but like it was hard to really see any aspect of this man that was redeeming at first. And then like his interactions with Gimli are what made this character, and gave you an appreciation for the fact that like he did care for the hobbits. Like, just ugh. Anyway, so he was kind of a piece of shit when he first showed up in Rivendell, kind of full of himself, thought he knew better than everyone. I think was very acknowledging of the fact that like everyone else saw him as a redneck elf, but then still held himself above all of these other people, except for maybe Aragorn, like had respect for Aragorn. Everyone else, he was like, gross, a dwarf. And in the Hobbit movies, you can really see that arrogance shining through, given who he inherited it from. And like he grows a little bit in the Hobbit, but his real growth is in Lord of the Rings, and specifically, again, his relationship with Gimli. He and Gimli do not get along at all at first, and then like over time you see the relationship growing into kind of like a frenemies thing where like they respect each other as warriors, and then they respect each other as companions, and then they respect each other finally as friends, and then it deepens into something more. I am a proponent of the fact that like he took Gimli to the Undying Lands, which is like a no-no to start with, but like honest to God, like these two were in love, and if you want to believe that it was the type of love that isn't romantic and is not sexual, fine, whatever, but like they were in love, and their love was deeper than their love for the other members of the Fellowship, and not in the negative way, just in the fact that they had grown over time to be this close. And like Aragorn was there and was just as important to them, but they had transcended kind of the racial prejudice that they were both raised with and had come to appreciate each other. And again, that line from Helm's Deep, right? Like, are you okay with dying with a friend? While at the same time giving each other shit for how many orcs they had managed to kill. With Gimli going like, I got 64 or something like that, and Legolas being mad and shooting an arrow between his legs and going, that's my 64, and Gimli going, he's dead. He was already dead, and Legolas going, what was it? He was like, there was a twitch. He's twitching because he has my knacks embedded in his nervous system, and he moves his axe, and the orc twitches around. So, like, really, just extreme character growth in such a good way for him. And, like, he still is more of a reserved character at the end. Like, he still seems a little bit standoffish, but you are able to then appreciate that standoffishness is not coming from a place of arrogance. It's really, honestly, that he's just really autistic. He has a really hard time making friends. So Gimli becomes kind of this translator for him. And it's funny, like there's a couple other scenes. I could talk for hours about this man. There's like one other scene that's like really funny with him and Gimli, which is when they're drinking at Rohan. He says, like, oh, I'm starting to feel my drink, which, like, considering the fact that all of the elves drink like crazy, is funny, because he was probably fucking with all of these humans, and that means Gimli was in the know that he was fucking with these humans. Yes, it's honestly why people like him. He's autistic, and you're autistic, too. So yeah, just Legolas. Piece of shit, but the piece of shit we love. I'm sorry for that rant stuff.
No, I mean, I went off earlier, so you're good. Like, Legolas was admittedly the first character I really latched onto before I was like, oh, I found my parents in Aragorn and Arwen. And then, of course, Boromir just being like, love this man, because I understood his character development. That's something I need to unpack, but that's for another day. But Legolas is, like, he is standoffish, and he does observe the world around him, not because I think there's this assumption that he is not as intelligent right off the bat, but it's truly that he is taking in the world around him, and I wonder how much of that is that the fact that he does see more than them and hears more, and is just like, he's given his background, knowing that he has been away from the elves for a while, like isolated as much as them. He has more experience, but he has held that elvish coldness with him, and so he's probably become accustomed to people assuming things of him, while still he has these opinions that he has, and he is fiercely loyal, and he is like capable of, he is one of the elves that is most capable of change right off the bat. Like, I think he's had enough experiences, and he's young enough still, that he's like, yes, like, this is the way of the world, and in an instant it can change. And he just, I don't know. It's funny. That's what I wanted to say. It's funny hearing you describe it, because like, it sounds like to you it's Legolas and Gimli, and then some other assholes that are this story is about. But like, that's valid, because he plays a very important role, and he subverts a lot of assumptions, and like has character development while still remaining not stagnant but consistent. He's a good character.
I think, again, the reason I harp on that Gimli-Legolas relationship is he had a relationship with Aragorn, and, like, you get to see that when they greet each other and stuff. But, like, the way he holds himself around other people is consistent, even with that relationship with Aragorn. It's through the growth of his relationship with Gimli that you see those aspects of him. And, like, when you said that line about him, like, expecting people to have preconceived notions of him, it clicked with me. Like, he is the son of a ruler, and like, they know his dad, and they know what his dad is like, so like, yeah, they do expect him to be a certain way, and I think that's why he holds himself in the way that he does around other people. And I think he was angry with Gimli, maybe without realizing it, for having preconceived notions of him, but then realized that Gimli had those preconceived notions of all elves, and that it wasn't about him specifically as son of this one guy. So I think he was able to be like, oh, so then if he had these preconceived notions of everyone because he doesn't know them, then like, he was able to examine in himself, like, what preconceived notions did I have of him for being a dwarf and not for being him? And like, all of these little things that I think that that's a more thoughtful way of looking at it now. The he hears more, sees more. Like, he's constantly in autistic sensory overload. Of course, he's withdrawn. But also just, I think he has that funny little humor to him that Gimli.
Yes.
That Aragorn appreciates because he knows him, but like, through Gimli we learn it. Again, I think because that relationship is the most meaningful for him in the Fellowship at the time. Not because, again, he didn't connect with the others, but it was through Gimli that like, he challenged, that was the most challenging connection for him, and it had the most potential and room to grow, and could have been easily the most stunted growth. And instead, like, they both leaned into it really hard and became like these funny little husbands who do these things for each other. And I think through each other are able to learn and appreciate each other's cultures in more meaningful ways, while also being able to critique them. Because I think they would be able to provide room for each other to do that. And I think the reason why is because Legolas finally is able to let go of like these preconceived notions of dwarves and understand that Gimli has pride in his people, not because he believes that they are better, or because that pride is in part earned, but because he recognizes that Gimli is proud of his people because of the actions they've actually taken, and like the trials they've actually undergone, and he just wants acknowledgement for that rather than some preconceived deserving sense of self-worth. I think he realized Gimli doesn't have an ego, and it allows him to let go of his own ego a little bit more around him.
I think so. Like, hold on. Like, it may not be the typical ego, only because he does have Well, no, not even ego. I would call it more pride in the fact that he is dwarvish. Like, Gimli is proud of his heritage. He is very, like, no nonsense and won't hear a poor word of his people. But I think that also speaks to his knowledge of, like, what his, I believe it was his uncle and his father, like, what they've been through and the things that they've done for the realm. Like, he carries that with him. I think that he has some almost generational trauma that he's dealing with, and I think that that's why he and Legolas ultimately vibe, is that Legolas is also carrying that with him. He's carrying his father's expectations and past with him, and like, he's not out, neither of them are necessarily out to save the world in a huge way that is like evident and astounding, but they both seem to recognize the weight of the task ahead of them, and they meet it in such similar ways. They meet that task with very similar work ethics, just from different angles, I think. And it's really interesting to see, especially, and you mentioned the sense of humor, like, they both develop a sense of humor through each other's eyes, as they learn more about each other and develop more and understand more about each other's cultures and the world around them. They start to, like, connect on that level of very dry senses of humor.
Yeah. I think it's very much a Pride and Prejudice kind of story. Not like really, like legitimately, I think they both had these preconceived notions of each other as like very arrogant people and very full of themselves. And I think when they were both able to take that step back and recognize that it's pride in the actuality. And I think you're right. Like, I think Gimli wouldn't stand for a poor word to be spoken about his people if it did not come from a place of knowledge, of understanding of that reality. Because I think Gimli would be the first to be like, there's some problematic fucks in our family if it got down to it and he was drunk enough. But I think that comes from a place of like the same thing that Legolas suffers from, which is that weight of expectations on their shoulders from other people. And I also agree with your highlight of them kind of not, of like recognizing the weight of their task and like knowing their place in it and knowing that they're not out to save the world as like the hero of the story, but as like side characters, and because of that they're heroes in the story. I think it's understanding that it is pride and not arrogance, and understanding that they both know their roles well enough to acknowledge that they are not here at the end of the day to be the ones that songs are sung about, because they are the side characters. They are in their own families, I think, often shoved aside so often that they feel relegated to those roles, and it is because of that they are able, I think, the most out of everyone to connect with people. Because even Aragorn struggles to like make connections with the people of Rohan at times, because he doesn't know how to deal with that longevity, you know? Whereas like Legolas and Gimli are like, we're here for a good time, not a long time.
Agreed. Like, they don't, that's interesting, because they don't carry with them the additional like future expectation, I don't think, that Aragorn does. Because at that point, it seems like Legolas, not only has Gimli pretty much all of the strongholds of the dwarves are gone or wiped out in some way, or the dwarves have like they've kind of evolved at that point. I'm sure that there's other strongholds that we just haven't seen as much of, but like the major ones are no longer as effective. But like, Aragorn really knows that if they are successful in this and that expectation holds up that he will become king, like, how does he reconcile with that? Whereas Legolas also has lost, like where is Mirkwood right now? Where are the elves? Like, what is Legolas's place at this point? And if not with another kind of misfit that he's found in Gimli. So I think that's part of why they vibe so much. And like Aragorn, just to kind of take a slight detour, like he's already lost the one other person in the Fellowship that would have maybe even remotely understood his plight and his difficulty in Boromir. And like I the only big reason to mourn Boromir, aside from the fact that he really could have had that development, is that he really would have been such a good steward, a good right-hand man for Aragorn. And I think that Legolas has that in Gimli as a kind of juxtaposition, you know?
Yeah, in the truest sense. And I think ultimately, whether Boromir intended to or not, he put more weight on Aragorn with his death and his dying words. And that made that connection for him harder. Whereas, again, like these two are just like in this world that we are leaving, or that we are not going to be living in the same way as these. What do we owe these people? And if we decide we owe them anything, then that is a weight we carry differently from everyone else, because maybe we will live with them, or maybe we will live aside from them. But in these moments, we live together, we fight together, we are truly warriors in the traditional sense of like, we understand that these relationships are important, not just because this is a person that is fighting this war as well, but because this is a person that is fighting alongside me and can carry that weight with me and be my equal, my friend.
Yeah. I think Legolas is just like, he is obviously the most consistent elf that we have interaction with, and he was another one that he, going to the basics of this, like showing the best of each of these races and really the best of humanity in our own world. Like Legolas becomes more human than some humans are, and I don't think he would have gained that if he hadn't left home, if he hadn't met Gimli, if he hadn't been such a vital part of Aragorn's life at that point. And like, he's a good boy. He did a good job.
Yeah, and I think what really opened him up to that, aside from like the tiny little relationship things that probably happened that like the movies don't capture, is I think that moment where we hear the grief in Gimli's voice at the mines. I think that might have opened up Legolas a little bit more to like understanding that
100%.
his pride in his people is not arrogance. It is, he has seen that they were great once and understands that greatness not in terms of the power or the wealth, but in the terms of the strength and fortitude and hard work that it took to build that. Like, he values the hard work and not the things that the hard work wrought.
Agreed. Yeah. Funny mention hard work. Everything seems so goddamn effortless for Legolas. But like, how much of that do you think
It's a mask.
Yeah, how much is a mask and how much of it can Gimli actually see through? Whereas Gimli seems like he's having to put so much effort forth, when really like it's the fact that he's keeping up with this elf and these other warriors is like, they're all of their own level of insanity and badassery. Like, it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, like Gimli, it's not like he does it completely without complaint, but he does it because it's necessary, and he does it because it is right, and he does it because it is good, and he does not let himself stand in his own way. And like, who can't appreciate that?
100%. I like that. He does it because because it is good and because it is right, and it's not, Gimli's not a simpleton. He just does.
And I think that's because you mentioned that like a lot of people maybe take Legolas as being a little simple. I think that reads the same for Gimli. Like, I think they come to an understanding and a respect for the level of intelligence they truly have, and that it's different from what other people might consider intelligent, but that like that has a value anyway.
Yeah. Okay. I think you're right. I think moving along here, only because we could keep talking, but I think we're both getting, the elves, man. Elves.
Elves! There's so much to be said.
Yeah. But I have one more slide.
No.
Dishonorable mention, Tauriel.
Only because she was done dirty by the script.
Yeah, and it like that. I already used just juxtaposition, but that's what it is. Like that juxtaposition of not only Galadriel, but also Arwen. Like what we were talking about with Arwen being gentle and kind and strong and capable and really being kind of the female empowerment that we needed at that time. They tried too hard with Tauriel.
Yes.
And it fell so flat. And we've talked about it before, but I figured it was worth mentioning again. Like, what the fuck?
Real quick, Arwen does read as written by a man, maybe, but Tauriel reads as written by a man, thinking he knows what women want.
Yeah, it just, I don't know. When it first came out, maybe that's what someone thought that was needed, and for a lot of people, I'm sure it was. Oh no. Can you now? Oh, weird. But yeah, like, weird audio issues. But yeah, maybe it was at the time. I don't fully remember, because I do remember when they first introduced, or they were like announcing that she would be part of it. It was so exciting, and then they just, similar to how they did Thranduil kind of dirty. It seems like they threw her in there as a romantic interest, and that seemed to be her only function.
Yeah, like, Arwen was a romantic interest, don't get me wrong, but that wasn't the whole of her character, and that is not why she was important.
Maybe Tolkien was also drinking the Respect Women juice when he wrote her, / Peter Jackson or whoever was writing the actual script, versus whatever the fuck happened here. And like, it's a shame. It's a real shame, because it was badass to see another dual wielding, like, kick-ass woman, and then
To have it fall so flat.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not lying. We're not lying, guys, when we say, like, truly the world of AFAB or female presenting or in any way related to AFAB, gender, or sex, whatever, people were very excited about her, and then she was just garbage.
Yeah.
Hot garbage, but garbage.
Hot garbage. It was a shame. A real shame. Because we're big supporters of strong female characters, and we want that, but at the time of, what was it, like 2015? I don't know. It just... Why are you gonna put her in there as a love triangle situation, as a added character? Like, if you're gonna add a character, have them add something like they've done with Galadriel, where they've added her a whole plot line that didn't exist, and they're as boring and disappointing as that third episode was for me. It still was
It was
valid.
still interesting.
And even though they're borderlining, maybe that's why I put her in here, but they're borderlining at this point in episode 3 for me as hinting a little too much at some kind of romantic involvement with the man, when we know that at this point Galadriel should be with Celeborn. Like, it's too much. It's getting a little dangerous, and that's why I'm scared to move on to the next episode.
Fair. I don't read it that way, but I can see why it would be read that way. I'm still a proponent of, if Tauriel had read as a sibling to Legolas versus a love interest, if you read it that way, the scenes are more interesting. She's more palatable as a character if you read it as sibling versus love.
Well, and she kind of does see him as a sibling. It's Legolas that has the hard-on for her.
And even then, like, I don't know if Orlando Bloom was having a hard time acting that out, but it doesn't always come across as that.
Yeah. It's a shame.
We're gonna have to start wrapping up here. So let's.
Are you
do-
exhausted? Are you
No,
tired of my
but-
bullshit?
No, I would keep going for hours on end. However, I do have work in the morning. Realistically, day jobs, guys. So I'm thinking we do our smash or pass since we're gonna have a second episode of Elves anyway. We can complain more later.
Fair enough. Okay, real quick then. Oliver Vendel, smash or pass?
Oliver Vendel.
Yeah.
Oliver Vendel probably pass.
Fair. Okay, pass. Elrond,
Smash.
respectfully, smash. Arwen,
Respectfully, marry and smash.
respectfully, this is my mother. But I won't add to that. Okay. Eladin and or Elrohir.
Probably smash, given their family history and they're hot.
Fair enough. Aragorn, smash or pass?
Disrespectfully smash.
Respectfully pass. Even if he wasn't dad,
Daddy.
pass. Lothlorien, the actual physical place.
Smash.
Let's smash. Galadriel.
You already know the answer! Smash.
Pass. Celeborn.
Respectfully smash. Lovingly smash.
Very caringly. Caringly?
Gently.
Gently. Smash. Haldir.
Smash.
Fucking disrespectfully, nastily smash.
I feel like he deserves more respect upon his name!
No, not a chance. Craig Parker knocking it out of the park here.
Smash.
The physical location and the people of Mirkwood.
Nah. Pass.
Pass.
Hard pass.
Okay, but that throne though. Thranduil.
Nothing. Disrespectfully tell him to suck it and pass.
Also pass. Fuck that guy. Legolas.
Still a smash, man. I, like, wanted to smash the boy from the first time I saw the movie.
Why would you,
Aragorn more, but he was...
why would you do that to Gimli?
I could say something, but I won't.
Probably pass for me, honestly. Tauriel.
Ugh. Hot as hell. So probably smash, but like one night stand, never call her back.
Fair.
I think she's the kind of one night stand that calls you by somebody else's name when you're having sex.
Oh my god. And that name is fucking Keeley. Like, I get it. I get what they were trying to do. But also,
It felt so
cease and
flat.
desist, please, for the love of God. I hope that that's a case study for writing classes or something. Yeah.
She did not pass the Bechdel test.
No. Oh my god. Like, even in scenes with Thranduil almost not passing the Bechdel test, if that makes any goddamn sense.
It's just terrible. Terrible. But thank you all for joining us
Yeah,
in
thanks,
our
guys.
first episode of The Elves. It was a fucking fun, phenomenal time. I could talk about this all day, and I would, but it's gonna be 11. We've been live since
Oh
8.
shit, I thought it was only 10.
Dude, no, we've been at it for 3 hours. Because there's a lot to say. Like I said, Tolkien could only be bothered about the elves, and it shows. So there's a lot to contend with, and the movies do them just as much justice.
Agreed. I think you're right. They, like, having that context of knowing that the world was essentially created for the elves, no matter how accurate that may be. Again, I saw a quote of some kind, but like it makes sense, and they really did for the most part. Overall, the elves are very well developed and well placed in the storyline itself. So, but yeah, thanks guys for joining us. Appreciate it.
I will say, who knows what he could have done if he had more time, but
Yeah.
this is what we're left with, and it's a great legacy. So yeah, thank you guys for joining us. We will see you again hopefully next week.
Yeah. And normally I don't raid out after these, but let's see if
Kai's still alive.
are they?
Yes, they're playing with Ari, Mikey, and Blinds.
Might as well hop over there. For anyone who is lurking, who is more of interest in like just vibing and listening to something where we just kind of go off and bullshit, you are more than welcome. Thank you, first of all, for hanging out, especially if you're a first-time viewer or someone who just normally hangs out in the background. We greatly appreciate you. We are gonna pop over to Yippee-Ki-Yay stream. They are playing Dead by Daylight, which is sometimes can be loud. It's not scary per se, but it is not easy listening. It's a game.
Yeah, and it's loud.
It is loud. So I'll go ahead and give you guys a few minutes or a couple of minutes with my outro here. To get ready for that, and thank you. Yeah, Apple, I still haven't fixed that. Jesus Christ. I've been doing this for months. But yeah, if you want to post a little raid message. But Kai, we're gonna pop over. Kai is my fiance, so a little bit of nepotism there, I always like to say, which I won't apologize for. But love you guys. Thank you, Archer, as always, for
Thank you for
being
having
here.
me.
Yeah. Eventually we might just, if this becomes a thing, I think we should think about having our own little
Channel.
Yeah, or like find some way to make this
Distinct.
Yeah, which I think we've done with the overlays, but we'll see. We got time to think about it.
Yeah, I'm thinking also doing like ask me anything about Lord of the Rings lore and how us go off on tangents people are dying to hear us talk about. So maybe I'll make an email address for us and have it posted as a message next time.
Agreed. Not me trying to remember how to raid.
In the meantime, just thank you again to everyone who's here listening with us. We appreciate it. We could do this with or without viewers, but it is special to see people hanging out.
Agreed. Especially especially as we tend to talk out of our asses for much of it. But I think the next Elvish one that we do, because I think we're going to get through all the races, the next Elvish one we do will have a little more like background and deep diving and like actual, it's a lot of fucking information, so I'm trying to find a good healthy way to like condense it for people who aren't as actively avid. But yeah, it's so much, and I had 2 weeks and I still didn't do it, but thank you for coming with me on this adventure.
I mean, the same can be said for any of the races, so we'll probably revisit a bunch of them as we watch more of the Rings of Power or rewatch the movies. We'll probably give more attention to specific details. I know I love to reference scenes from the movie that you may or may not have seen, but truly it is for the love of the thing and what it has given us and the multiple ways that it can be read. So if you have a hot take, please share it.
Yeah, maybe that's what we'll do. We'll get some hot takes going too. But yeah, all right. Thanks, guys. Bye. I'm gonna post the raid situation, and then we'll be heading over. And I'm gonna weirdly put my starting screen, quote unquote, up. Bye.
Bye.